It was a beautiful sunny day, and the protagonist was walking home from school with her friend. Suddenly, her friend glanced to the side and asked Yuju if the guy standing nearby wasn't her older brother. He was really handsome, so girls usually paid attention to him. Her friend was convinced it was him, Seo Taeju. Yuju looked in the direction she was pointing and confirmed that it was definitely her brother. The guy was focused on his phone while Yuju's friend sighed dreamily and said her brother was a total snack. She started begging Yuju to introduce them, but Yuju really didn't want to. She never understood why girls liked her brother so much, and honestly, she often pretended they weren't even related when they were outside. She asked her friend to leave. She didn't want to talk to her brother, she got enough of him at home. But then her friend noticed another guy just as good-looking had shown up. Turned out to be Gu Dojin. The girl couldn't believe two hot guys were standing so close. And still, Yuju refused to go over. In that suit, Dojin looked absolutely insane. Both guys were tall and hot, like freaking models. Yuju's cheeks turned slightly red when she saw her neighbor. If we're talking about Yuju's first love, we'd have to go back to when she had just started elementary school. One time she got scared because someone was standing at their door, so she ran to tell her brother. Seo Taeju was in 4th grade back then. His little sister annoyed him and interrupted his video games, but she wouldn't leave him alone, begging him to go check the door. She thought it was the new neighbors and was dying to see them. The boy didn't care, until they both froze when they heard a voice behind the door asking if anyone was home. Little Yuju walked up, cracked the door open a bit, and shyly asked who it was. And even though she was just a kid, she instantly understood one thing: some people are just blindingly good-looking. A really handsome boy was standing in front of her, holding a rice cake and smiling warmly. He asked if her parents were home. Sometimes even the dumbest stuff can make your heart race, and it's hard to explain those feelings with words. He said he had just moved into the apartment next door and wanted to greet them with a rice cake. Yuju, stunned by his looks, blurted out that he was really handsome and just stared at him with her mouth hanging open. That's how her first love became Gu Do-hyuk, who seemed like the perfect man, even if the 8-year age gap was an impossible wall to climb. Plus, Gu Do-hyuk was a divorced man with a kid, so the obstacles were even worse. Back home, Yuju loudly announced that she was back, but found out her brother still wasn't home. He was probably having drinks with Gu Dojin. By the way, Gu Dojin was Gu Do-hyuk's younger brother. He was the same age as Taeju and a close friend of his. Yuju headed to the shower, still surprised she'd seen Dojin in the building that morning. In that suit, he looked like a gangster. Hot water ran down her body as she admitted to herself he'd gotten as handsome as Gu Do-hyuk. Or maybe it was just the suit effect. After the shower, she wrapped her hair in a towel, slapped on some face patches, and wondered why her brother still hadn't come back. It was almost dinner time. She decided to call him and ask when he'd be home. Seo Taeju was surprised and asked why she wanted to know. Yuju said it was dinner time, and she was waiting for him. That annoyed him. He wasn't her personal chef, after all. He told her she could just make something herself. Yuju started complaining, and Taeju said she could just join them at the restaurant. Hearing that, Yuju was shocked and asked if he was serious. Taeju confirmed, especially since Dojin was paying this time. Yuju lit up and said she'd get ready right away to go with them. A bit later, Gu Dojin asked why Yuju had suddenly showed up at their table. Seo Taeju calmly said he couldn't let the kid go hungry. Meanwhile, Yuju smiled happily, staring at Dojin nonstop. He sighed and said the two of them were such freeloaders. Taeju didn't mind the comment, and patted his sister on the back, telling her to order whatever she wanted. Yuju wasn't gonna be shy, so she called the waiter and started listing off all the dishes she wanted. Noticing Dojin's intense stare, she asked why he was looking at her like that. He seemed worried about the bill, but smiled and said that wasn't it at all. She looked dangerously hot in that outfit. Resting his chin on his hand, he said he'd always thought of her as a little kid. When had she gotten old enough to drink? Yuju blushed a bit. She was only 3 years younger than him, so she didn't think the age gap was that big. Her eyes sparkled seeing him in that suit. Why did he fire up her imagination like that? She asked why he was dressed that way. That's when Dojin took off his jacket, making Yuju swallow hard. His shoulders looked so broad in that shirt. He said he'd been at a cousin's wedding. Yuju remembered her school days, when all she cared about were cute boys' faces. But now she was totally hypnotized by a well-built male chest. She couldn't stop staring as he loosened his tie. The guy noticed and asked if she really liked his suit that much. She couldn't look away. Yuju got flustered and didn't know what to say, just kept staring. Taeju smiled and said he'd already told his friend girls love men in suits. He joked that if he went to college dressed like that, all the girls would fall for him. Then he asked if anyone was planning to get married anytime soon. Dojin mocked him, saying he should at least try putting on a suit first. Tired of the convo, he said, forget it, just drink your glass. Though he was talking to Taeju, Yuju grabbed the glass and started chugging it. Everyone laughed, and decided to get drunk together that night. A while later, the apartment was full of empty booze bottles. Yuju was known for being super picky, so it was hard for her to find a guy who met her standards. But right then, she felt like she'd found the ultimate ideal. Her hands were resting softly on the man's chest. Just one look, and she knew she wouldn't be able to stop staring. She didn't know if it was a dream or reality. And even if it was real, she wasn't sure she'd ever get the chance to witness that kind of beauty again. That night they got so drunk the guys passed out, and the girl didn't even care if it was a dream. She just wanted to keep staring at that wide, manly chest. Dojin was already asleep, letting out the occasional deep sigh every time her hands touched him. In the morning, the sun was shining brightly through the apartment windows. Dojin had a pounding headache, and in the brain fog, he thought it was way too hot. Maybe Taeju had accidentally turned on the heater. When he moved his hand, he touched something on top of him, and for a second, thought it was a big dog. But when he cracked his eyes open, he saw it wasn't a dog. It was Yuju, lying right on top of him, making his whole body ache. He sat up, head still throbbing, not understanding why she was so close. He stood up, adjusted his shirt, and wondered how that girl could act so chill. He went to the other room and called out to Taeju, telling him it was time to get up. He said they all had to go to class, so he and his sister needed to go home to change. Taeju, feeling just as bad as Dojin, asked why they couldn't just get ready there. After all, they were neighbors. But Dojin insisted they leave, since he still had to clean up the mess from the night before. Dojin hopped into the shower while hearing Taeju wake up Yuju in the other room, telling her it was time to go to college. Then he heard the girl scream in panic after realizing she was running late. Dojin turned on the water, thinking he had clearly gone too far. His head hurt, but the weirdest thing was his chest also ached. When he stepped up to the mirror and saw his reflection, he froze in shock. His chest and neck were covered in bruises and bite marks. He had no idea what happened. It looked like a dog had attacked him. Then, suddenly, a blurry memory came back. Yuju, drunk, leaning into him, and the feel of her hands on his chest. The guy blushed and smacked his face, overwhelmed by the embarrassment. What the hell had that girl done to him? Meanwhile, the students were happily filing out of the classroom. Yuju could barely move her feet. She felt awful. She told her friend she'd probably head home. The girls said goodbye cheerfully, waving at each other. Suddenly, Yuju got a message from Gu Dojin asking where she was. It felt weird. He never messaged her like that, so directly. She replied saying she was already on her way home. She knew something must have happened if he was texting her like that. She was near the gate when she saw a familiar figure. Dojin was standing by the fence, hood low over his face. When he saw her, he called out immediately, his tone serious. Yuju quickly walked over and asked if something had happened. Had something happened to Taeju? But the guy replied that her brother was in class. Yuju got even more confused. She felt like he wanted to tell her something important, but at the same time, he seemed annoyed. After a few awkward seconds of silence, she asked what was going on, and what he wanted to say. Gu Dojin let out a short laugh, pulled down his hood, pointed at the bruises on his neck, and asked if she could see what had happened to him. Yuji was stunned. He looked awful, to say the least, but she asked why she had to hear about her older brother's friend's love drama. Dojin laughed again and said he couldn't believe she didn't remember what happened last night. The girl took a step back and asked what he was talking about. She was about to protest that there was no way she'd ever do something like that, but suddenly remembered the feeling of touching his chest, and the embarrassment hit her hard. She didn't know what to say to defend herself. The guy looked at her calmly, and said it was time she remembered. He grabbed her hand and told her she was coming with him now. The touch of his hand made her heart race. She was embarrassed about what had happened, and even more so, it seemed like Dojin was genuinely upset with her. When they got to his apartment, he pulled her in so fast they barely took off their shoes before entering. Yuju tried apologizing again, saying her memory was fuzzy and she barely remembered anything. But seeing her expression, Dojin realized she wasn't lying. She really didn't remember. When the guy reached for the edge of his sweatshirt, Yuju's face turned red and she panicked, shouting, "What are you doing?" Dojin looked at her sideways and said, "I just want to help you refresh your memory." When he took off his sweatshirt, the girl saw the marks on his body and let out a horrified, embarrassed scream. She liked his figure, but was ashamed of what she'd done. The guy stood there, sweatshirt off, just as embarrassed, and told her to take a good look at her handiwork. Thanks to her, his body had been aching all day. "Are you okay?" Dojin asked. "Why are you out here biting people like a dog?" The girl couldn't take her eyes off him and wouldn't stop apologizing. He grabbed her chin, lifting her face so she'd look him in the eyes, and asked, "Do you really think a simple sorry is enough?" After all that, Yuju was completely captivated by the sight of his chest, so her apologies didn't sound as sincere as she meant them to be. Dojin told her that with a face like that, her apologies seemed fake. "And also, why are you smiling? Do you want me to do the same thing to you that you did to me?" Yuju had only seen the guy this angry once before, right before midterms. Taiji kept bugging his friend with questions about when he'd finally make a move on the class president. The girl didn't care about that gossip, especially since it blocked her view of the TV, so she rudely told them to shut up and stop bothering her. Dojin told his friend they shouldn't talk about those things in front of a kid, and suggested they head out. Taiju was surprised that his friend still saw Yuju as a kid. That time, Dojin had been staying at their place for 2 days straight because he and his brother were working on a group project, and both of them were cranky and exhausted. Taiju tried to point out to Dojin just how blatantly grown up his sister had become. Still, Yuju told them to get lost, that they could keep working on their project at Gu Dojin's place. Her brother, trying to teach her a lesson, went to start a playful fight, but thanks to his lack of sleep, he was clumsier than usual and accidentally spilled a can of coffee on the laptop. The problem was, the laptop belonged to Gu Dojin, and because of the coffee it broke, along with the project they'd worked so hard on. Taiju and Yuju froze as they watched what had just happened. An ominous aura seemed to radiate from Gu Dojin, and both of them froze, seeing him like that for the first time. Even though the guy kept calm, he looked like he was ready to kill someone. Yuju clearly remembered how much her brother had to beg for forgiveness back then. In truth, Dojin is a really good guy, and both she and her brother are pretty submissive, so they have no issue apologizing when needed. That's why Yuju got on her knees, put her hands together in a pleading gesture, and started apologizing, promising it would never happen again and that she had no idea what came over her. After all, not even when drunk had she ever done something like that before. She was sure that just by looking at her, his heart would soften and he wouldn't stay mad. She looked at him and said she'd do anything he asked. Gu Dojin stood still, breathing deeply, and just told her to get up. He asked if he had it right. Wasn't she the type of person who did dumb stuff when drunk? She replied shyly that yeah, that was true. He sighed and said he'd forgive her this time, and only because it was her. But she better not act like that with anyone else or she could get into serious trouble. He warned her that from now on, she had to be more careful and that he wasn't sure if he could trust her the same way again. The girl felt relieved he forgave her so easily and nodded obediently. Suddenly, Gu Dojin asked what she'd do if something like that happened again. Yuju promised it wouldn't happen again. But then her gaze drifted back to his broad, beautiful chest, and blushing, she thought she couldn't be 100% sure. So, laughing, she said that if it did happen again, she'd let him do to her what she had done to him. A vein pulsed in Gu Dojin's temple from pure irritation, and he asked if she had completely lost her mind. 2 weeks went by where Yuju was practically his personal servant, doing his every bidding. And now, once again, he was bossing her around like it was nothing. The girl didn't like it, but she put up with it just to fix things between them. Taiju noticed his sister's weird behavior, and asked his friend what he'd done to make her so obedient. Dojin said he had no clue, and told him to start packing his stuff. Yuju showed up with a sweet smile, and told Dojin she'd leave the coffee for him on the table. Taiju smiled and said he wanted coffee from his sweet little sister too, but Yuju flipped him off and told him not even in his dreams. Then Gu Dojin just had to say her name for the girl to sigh in resignation and say she got it. To be fair, most of the guy's requests were just coffee or small favors. For example, she had to wake him up every morning according to his class schedule. When she asked how much longer she'd have to keep following his orders, he said until the marks on his chest disappeared completely. But toward the end of the week, curiosity was eating her alive. What if he'd already healed and was just messing with her? Yuju didn't dare ask directly, so she decided to check for herself while he slept. But the moment she tried to unbutton his shirt, the guy grabbed her hand right away and asked what she was trying to do. The girl blushed and panicked, embarrassed she'd been caught doing something like that. She didn't want him to get the wrong idea, but she also didn't want to admit she was just trying to check if the bruises were still there. So she lied, saying she was trying to wake him up like he'd asked. But Dojin didn't believe her and got mad again, asking if she was drunk. She let out a squeak at such a suggestion. That was totally not it. Yuju let out a loud sigh, wondering why she didn't have the guts to just ask if his chest had healed already. While making coffee and thinking that her servitude might finally end soon, she heard her brother talking to his friend. Taeju couldn't understand why Dojin didn't want to go study abroad. The girl placed the coffee on the table and asked why he really didn't want to go. After all, he just had to improve his grades a bit, and everything would be fine. Taeju, who didn't get what was going on, asked his friend why Yuju was so sweet to him but always rude to her own brother. Dojin looked up from his tablet and suggested maybe it was because he was staying, while his friend was going to another country, leaving his sister behind. Yuju pouted. She didn't understand why Dojin didn't want to leave with her brother, since it would only be 4 weeks, long enough for all the marks on his body to disappear and for them to forget everything that had happened. She didn't realize that Dojin was secretly watching her from behind his tablet. He blushed slightly and thought the girl was still just as naive and dumb as ever. Friday morning, Yuju woke up in the apartment completely alone. Her brother had already flown out. Suddenly, she smelled a pleasant scent coming from somewhere in the apartment. She couldn't figure out what smelled so good. Then she got on alert. Where was that smell coming from? She was supposed to live alone for the next 4 weeks. She quickly left her room, thinking maybe her brother had missed his flight and was cooking instead of having left. When she entered the kitchen, she heard a noise and immediately asked if her brother had missed his flight, but she froze when she saw a familiar figure in an apron. That image left her completely hypnotized, and she could barely whisper what Dojin was doing in her apartment. Seeing him cook, she squealed happily, then pulled herself together and asked again why the guy was in her kitchen. But Dojin just said it was already late, so if she planned to eat breakfast, she should hurry, wash her face, and get dressed. Yuju didn't understand why he was making breakfast. It felt like she was dreaming a really strange dream. She finally said out loud that this wasn't the time for that. What really worried her was the fact that he was cooking for her. Why was he doing it? Did Taeja ask him to? While setting the table, the guy calmly replied that yes, Taeja had asked him to make sure his sister didn't starve while he was gone. He didn't look the least bit embarrassed. He finished setting the table and told her to hurry before the soup got cold. Yuju, for her part, felt very awkward. They were alone for the first time and in the same room, no less. Seeing all the delicious dishes he'd prepared made her mouth water, and she asked if she could eat first and shower later. Dojin sighed and asked why she was asking for permission. After all, it was her business, so the girl ran to the table. Sitting down and pushing past her embarrassment, she asked if she heard right. Would Dojin be cooking for her while her brother was away? The guy sat across from her and simply said yes. Then Yuju asked what about cleaning. Would he handle that too? The guy smiled slightly and replied that cleaning was also his job, but laundry would be Yuju's responsibility. The girl was happy to hear that, since she was used to her brother doing those things for her. She sincerely thanked him for the breakfast. When she took the first spoonful, she couldn't believe what she was tasting. She exclaimed that it was incredibly delicious. She even stood up suddenly and asked if he had really cooked it, or if he'd bought it. Dojin replied that he made it all himself. Yuju praised him, saying he even cooked better than Taeju. Dojin and Taeju studied at the same university and in the same department, so they were always together after class. Yuju followed their lead and enrolled in the same university. When Dojin found a place to live near campus, the girl found out the apartment next door was available, so she signed the lease and she and her brother moved in. Yuju went to university thinking that, even though they lived next door to each other pretty much their whole lives, it felt awkward knowing now they practically lived alone together. She could call him the annoying appa from the neighborhood. Before, they barely spoke because they felt awkward around each other. They started talking more after entering university. She was slowly applying lipstick when she suddenly realized it was the first time they were eating alone. The food and the marks on his body made her feel embarrassed. She tried to act natural, but her heart wouldn't stop pounding. If she were Taeju, Dojin would definitely stay the night at her place. While the guy washed the dishes after breakfast, the girl was secretly hoping he wouldn't make her serve him for all 4 weeks. She wanted to talk about all of that with him, so she called out. But Dojin suddenly asked why she hadn't gone to class. Still, he offered to make her coffee. There wasn't even a hint of a joke in his tone. Yuju was touched by his kindness, but that wasn't what she wanted to ask. With her heart racing, she asked if the marks on his chest had already healed. Dojin took a defensive stance and asked why she was suddenly asking that. The girl got flustered and said he was misunderstanding. The guy crossed his arms, and with a crooked smile, asked if she was just curious to know if her servitude was finally over. Yuju swallowed and protested that he was misunderstanding. Again, her heart kept racing. Suddenly, she wondered, had he always been this tall? Dojin was still smiling and asked, "So what? Do you want to admire my chest again?" Yuju raised her hands and said she was just worried about him, and asked him not to get so close. Feeling something firm under her hands, she realized she was touching his chest again, and thought how broad and strong it was. But then she blushed with embarrassment, and quickly tried to explain herself. She said she didn't mean to do anything weird, she just wanted to push him away a little. Dojin covered his chest with his hands like an offended maiden and said tense, that Yuju really was something special. The girl ran out of the apartment, thanked him once again for breakfast, and wished him a good day. Dojin sighed in relief, but suddenly heard the girl's voice again. He got worried. What had happened now? Yuju came back to let him know she had plans with her friends that night, so she'd be having dinner with them, and he didn't need to cook. The boy was overcome by an unfamiliar feeling. She seemed so cute that his heart skipped a beat. He wondered, is this what older brothers feel? He was about to return to the dirty dishes when he saw the purse she had left on the table. Yuju was already putting on her shoes and about to leave when she heard his voice calling her. She wondered what he wanted now. Dojin walked over and gave her a light tap on the head with her purse, telling her not to be so careless. The girl thanked him, surprised. Then, suddenly, the boy asked who she was meeting up with. With girls? She smiled and said yes, that she was meeting up with the girls from her group. He felt relieved and wished her a good time, reminding her not to drink too much. The day was coming to an end and the sun was starting to set slowly. Yuju was having a great time, chatting with her friends at a restaurant. She was drinking another glass when the girls started talking about the new guy at the university, saying he was incredibly handsome. One of the girls said she knew who they were talking about. His name was Sungmin. He was tall and very good-looking. Another friend said yes, his name was Shin Sungmin. He had a lot of followers on social media and had mentioned that he wanted to become a trainee. One of the girls nudged Yuju with her elbow and said there was no way she didn't know who they were talking about. Yuju looked confused and said maybe she'd seen him around. The girls laughed and mentioned they had seen that guy trying to sit next to her at the last department meeting. They were sure he liked her. Yuju didn't remember any of that, and felt uncomfortable with so many hints, so she honestly admitted that she wasn't interested in him at all. Her friend told the others that Yuju wasn't the kind of girl who went for someone just because of their looks. She asked if they had seen Yuju's brother. In the computer science department, there were 2 guys known for their looks, like celebrities, and Yuju's brother was one of them. The girls swore that the last time she saw him, he was so handsome it almost hurt to look at him. Yuju was relieved that the attention shifted to her brother, but suddenly one of her friends said she was sure he had a girlfriend. That surprised her. She took another sip of alcohol and said her brother didn't have a girlfriend. She was completely sure. The girls sighed in relief and said they knew you couldn't believe everything you read on student forums. Suddenly, a tall blonde-haired guy approached them and cheerfully said he was happy to see his seniors. Yuju recognized him immediately. It was Shin Sungmin, the very guy they had just been talking about, and she felt uncomfortable. The boy smiled widely and asked if she minded if he sat next to her. Yuju looked at him silently, thinking that after what her friends had told her, this would be awkward. Sungmin looked at her with hopeful eyes, not taking his gaze off her. When Yuju had just entered university, she was still getting used to alcohol, so one day something happened. She still smelled a bit like alcohol when she went to class the day after a party. Upon entering the classroom, she was surprised by how warm and cheerful everyone's welcome was. Her friend seemed upset and asked why she had to find out about everything through rumors and not directly from her. She was disappointed, and Yuju didn't understand what she meant. She looked at her with a confused face and asked what rumors she was talking about. Her friend replied that everyone at the university was saying Yuju and Sungmin were dating and that they made a beautiful couple. Yuju froze. She had no idea where that rumor had come from. It wasn't true. Later, at home, she told her brother, and he asked again who that guy was. She replied that Sungmin was a senior from her department. He had started the rumor that something had happened between them. Taeju, who was ready to smash anyone's face in for his sister, demanded that she give him that jerk's number. But Yuju said they hadn't even exchanged numbers. That made the rumor even more outrageous to her. Taeju was upset and asked if that guy had lost his mind. He told her that he didn't have class the next day, so he would go to the university with her. At that moment, Gu Dojin walked into the apartment. He was going to ask Taeju if he had finished his assignment, but froze when he heard the conversation. Yuju said everything was fine and that she wasn't a child, but her brother objected, saying that she was a 20-year-old child. Dojin asked what they were arguing about. His friend replied that he had just found out some idiot was bothering Yuju, so he declared that he would go with her to class the next day because he wasn't going to let things slide. He asked his friend if he agreed. Dojin thought for a moment and said Yuju wasn't entirely wrong and that Taeju might be overreacting a little. Sometimes, her brother's overprotectiveness drove her crazy, so she thanked Dojin and said she could handle those kinds of problems on her own. She got up to leave and said the matter was no longer up for discussion. She thought that Dojin's coldness and composure unsettled her even more than her brother's excessive protectiveness. She appreciated that her brother cared, but she didn't want him solving all her problems. She wanted to finally be seen as an adult. After all, she wasn't a little girl anymore. Meanwhile, Gu Dojin sat next to his friend on the couch. Taeju asked if, even though he thought he was overreacting, didn't he think it was better to step in now before it was too late? Dojin calmly replied that he shouldn't have told Yuju anything. He didn't have class the next day either, so they could have faced him together. Now, looking at her empty glass, Yuju, with her mind clouded by alcohol, realized she didn't even clearly remember what had happened after that day. She realized she had gotten drunk again, and wasn't feeling well at all. Sungmin was watching her closely and noticed she was no longer thinking clearly. A sly smile crossed his face and an opportunistic idea formed in his mind. He got as close to her as possible and spoke into her ear. Yuju didn't like it. She felt uncomfortable beside him, but he leaned in and whispered that he had forgotten his umbrella in the classroom and that he had taken it. He said he had left it at his house and offered for her to come get it. Even though Yuju was drunk and her mind was foggy, she clearly felt she didn't like being near that guy. What bothered her even more was that her friend Sojong had gotten up with the excuse of going to the bathroom, leaving her seat free and allowing the guy to sit next to Yuju. Now, from afar, she was discreetly cheering him on, thinking that the two of them liked each other, but Yuju was getting chills. She didn't understand how her friend couldn't see the obvious. She wasn't interested in that guy. The girls were playing a drinking game called Carrot Bunny. Whoever lost had to drink. Yuju kept losing again and again, and the more she drank, the harder it was to keep up with the game. Sungmin was watching her closely. It was obvious she had drunk too much, but that only worked in his favor. Earlier, when he invited her to his house, she had said it wasn't necessary, that she'd pick it up later or he could bring the umbrella to campus. But the guy didn't give up, and trying to sound charming, told her that it was going to rain tomorrow, so it was better if she came to get it to avoid getting wet. But Yuju firmly replied that it wasn't necessary. She had plenty of umbrellas at home. It infuriated him not being able to seduce her. While watching another girl hand Yuju another glass, he wondered why she was so cold with him. It was like his charms didn't work on her. Yuju could barely hold the glass, so he offered to drink it for her, and the other girls praised him, saying he looked like a knight in shining armor. But Yuju flatly refused his help and said she could handle it. Then, she downed the whole soju cocktail in one shot. Everyone at the table went silent, and for a few moments, silence reigned. Sojong finally realized that maybe her friend didn't like that handsome guy at all, and that her efforts to match them up had been in vain. The other girls seemed to come to the same conclusion and decided it was time to end the night, suggesting they all head home. Upon hearing that, Shin Sungmin wrapped his arm around the now completely drunk Yuju and asked her friends where she lived. He said he wanted to take her home. He said he wanted to. But his behavior started to worry the girls. Even though they studied together, he was still practically a stranger, and his insistence sounded rather suspicious. Sojong got up immediately and said his help wasn't needed, that Yuju lived nearby and they'd call her brother to come pick her up. Meanwhile, Gu Dojin was staring at his phone, growing more anxious because she still hadn't returned. It was nearly midnight. Suddenly, his phone rang. He asked why someone was calling so late, but he heard a completely different voice. A girl gave him the name of the bar and told him Yuju was so drunk she couldn't walk. She asked him to come pick her up. The boy got off the couch immediately. He ran so fast he ended up soaked in sweat. When he entered the bar, he was out of breath. Yuju's friends felt relieved to see that Dojin had arrived for her. Meanwhile, he froze upon seeing the unpleasant scene before him. He locked eyes with a guy who was clearly not happy about his arrival. And why was Yuju sitting next to him, unconscious? Seeing that guy with his arm around her, rage began to boil inside Dojin. What the hell was going on here? Dojin shot such a cold glare at the stranger that the guy immediately pulled his hand away from the girl. Kneeling in front of her, he anxiously wondered how she had ended up like this. She was in such bad shape she couldn't even open her eyes. He tried to wake her up, but she didn't respond. Realizing she was completely out of it, Dojin lifted her onto his back as if she weighed nothing. Sojong handed him her friend's purse and thanked him again for coming to get her. She watched him walk away with Yuju on his back when Sung-min approached her, and quietly commented that Yuju's brother looked really intimidating. But the girl simply replied that he wasn't her brother. She explained that Yuju's real brother had gone abroad temporarily, and now her friend was taking care of her. The guy was surprised and asked if it wasn't dangerous to let her go in that state with another man. Sojong thought he seemed much more suspicious and dangerous. And now, more than ever, she replied that those two had known each other since they were kids and were like family. But the guy stared at them as they walked away, thinking it was impossible for a man and a woman to be just friends. In the end, everyone said goodbye and went home. When they arrived at the apartment, Gu Dojin laid the drunk girl on the bed and covered her with a blanket. He was thinking about how careless she was, and how she could act so recklessly. Then he remembered the guy from the group, and the anger started boiling inside him again. He didn't understand Yuji or what could have happened. He was upset with her for being so thoughtless. Even so, everything had turned out fine, so he tucked her in carefully and decided to talk to her the next day. Closing the door to her room behind him, he let out a deep breath and wondered when Yuji had grown up. She used to be so easy to handle. How had he not noticed how mature she had become? He was worried about her habit of drinking too much, and how she behaved afterward. He remembered that incident with her chest and blushed. Once Yuju had gotten really scared. It happened when she was a child. She had woken up at night after hearing a noise and thought it was her dad, so she came out of her room asking why he was still up. But it turned out a thief had broken into the apartment. The event was so traumatic that even now as an adult, she trembles when she's home alone at night. The thief, startled by being discovered, ended up hurting the girl. Dojin had been young when he heard that the police had gone to the neighbor's house because of a break-in, but he didn't know the details. Only recently, before leaving, Taeja had told him that Yuju had been hurt. That's why he understood why her brother had been so worried and didn't want her to be alone at night. Now that he was gone, Dojin would have to sleep in the living room. Yuju slept uneasily. She felt sick and kept tossing and turning in bed. When she sat up, she felt dizzy and didn't quite understand where she was. She left the room holding her pounding head, unsure if she was still dreaming, or if all this was real. Then she saw something that left her stunned. Dojin was lying on the sofa, and his broad, beautiful chest was glowing under the light. Yuju thought she must still be dreaming. Like a dog unable to resist a juicy bone, Yuju couldn't take her eyes off the guy's muscular chest. She decided that, since it was a dream, it didn't matter, so she climbed on top of him. Dojin was dreaming that a mosquito shaped like Yuju was biting him, and he mumbled in his sleep as he tried to swat the annoying insect away. Morning came, and the guy felt a weight on his chest, as if someone was lying on top of him. When he suddenly opened his eyes, he saw the girl asleep on him, and thought she was at it again. She had lost her mind. There were marks on his body again. He started yelling for her to wake up immediately. Yuju, barely hearing the yelling, slowly opened her eyes and asked what was going on. After a moment, she finally saw Dojin's irritated face, and realized she had done the same thing as last time. She froze in fear, remembering she had promised not to do it again, but she had gotten drunk and ruined everything again. Later, while showering, she anxiously wondered what to do now. She scolded herself for her behavior. She had thought it was just a dream, and the moment she saw the guy's chest glowing in the moonlight, she lost control. Then she remembered their agreement. If it happened again, Dojin would do the same thing to her that she had done to him. Just thinking about it made her heart race, almost like she was looking forward to it, and that scared her. Why was she feeling such contradictory emotions? Dojin was like a brother to her. So then, why did she feel that thrill of excitement? Suddenly she thought about how tall the guy had become, how big and strong his hands were. She wondered how it would feel if he touched her, but she immediately jumped, horrified by her own thoughts. She felt like she was losing her mind. How could she think something like that? It was Dojin, her brother's friend, someone she'd known since childhood. She was nervous and didn't know how she'd be able to look him in the eye now. A terrible truth hit her. She was attracted to Dojin as a man. A while later, the girl was sitting in the living room, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. The guy ran a hand down his face and sighed heavily, asking if she remembered what they had agreed on last time. He was upset and said he had been very clear. If something like that happened again, he would return the favor in kind. Yuju burned with shame, unable to believe she was really going to face the consequences. She asked if he was serious. Dojin looked just as embarrassed as she did, but he was also angry, so he firmly replied that it wasn't a joke and that he had to follow through with the agreement. A little earlier, the girl had come out of the shower and sat down with a guilty expression, burning with shame. She could see that the guy was really mad at her. His piercing gaze and silence made her incredibly nervous. Finally, he made tea for both of them, and sitting across from her, he asked if she understood where her drinking habits could lead her. Yuji tried to justify herself, saying she normally didn't drink that much. She made a sad little girl face so Dojin would feel sorry for her, saying it was the first time in her life she'd gotten drunk like that, and that she didn't even like alcohol that much. The guy was clearly irritated, and with a heavy sigh, he asked if she'd done something like that with anyone else before. The girl immediately answered that of course not, that it was the first time something like this had ever happened. That only confused Dojin more, and he asked what the hell was wrong with her. Why was she doing this now? Did she have some kind of weird fetish? As the girl stayed silent, he said he was thinking of taking her to a psychiatrist. Yuju was incredibly embarrassed, but she knew she had to give at least a logical explanation. So she clenched her fists and started talking about her favorite actor. He had a broad, beautiful chest. Thanks to him, she realized that her ideal type was a man with a muscular chest. Dojin crossed his arms over his chest and muttered, asking if that meant any broad chest would do. But the girl protested, saying that wasn't the case at all. She began passionately explaining that it wasn't just the width, the frame, the muscles, the shape. It all played an important role in the overall look. That's why she confessed that when she saw her oppa, she realized he was perfect in that regard, and blushing, she apologized. Dojin stood up from the table and let out a deep sigh. Despite her honesty, he decided she needed to be taught a lesson. Reaching for the hem of his hoodie, he started to take it off. Yuju stared at him in shock, not understanding what he was doing. He looked at her seriously, and said he hadn't been joking last time. He reminded her that they had agreed that if it happened again, he would return the favor in kind. The girl couldn't believe he was serious, but Dojin gave her a firm look and said he had made a promise and had to keep it. In reality, he didn't plan to do anything. He just wanted to scare her a little. Her behavior worried him, and he wanted her to understand she couldn't act like that, especially with strangers. She could get into trouble. He thought he wouldn't give in to her pleas this time, but suddenly his eyes widened when something completely unexpected happened. Yuju grabbed the hem of her own hoodie and took it off. He froze, unable to believe she had actually done it. He thought she would just beg for forgiveness like before. He was so stunned he couldn't move, overwhelmed with embarrassment. His cheeks and ears turned red. He thought this girl had definitely lost her mind. He should scold her for being so reckless, but for some reason, he couldn't say a word. Yuju looked him in the eye and asked if he was going to do it. Dojin knelt in front of her, and even though everything inside him was screaming that this was wrong, he just exhaled. Then he leaned toward her, and as if hypnotized, touched her neck to leave a mark just like the one she had made on him. At some point, a thought crossed his mind. Why did Yuju, who had never paid attention to him before, suddenly seem so different from the image he had of her in his head? He thought he wanted to be the only one to see her like this. But then he pulled away in horror at what he had just done. But to his surprise, Yuju wasn't scared at all. She started scolding him for overreacting, saying he only had marks on one side, while she had them on both. She was upset and said it wasn't fair that now he owed her one. Dojin let out a laugh and said she was right. The girl looked at him intently and couldn't believe that her oppa, who always had that serious and grumpy expression, could make such an adorable face. At some point, both realized that their silly confrontation had crossed into unknown territory, and that both surprised and excited them. Dojin got up and began putting his hoodie back on, but the girl couldn't stop looking at him. A tense silence took over the room, and the next moment, he turned toward her, approached her, and a second later, hugged Yuju and kissed her. At that moment, a thought crossed the girl's mind. They were in a dangerous situation, but she wasn't afraid at all. Being next to him made her feel so comfortable that she wasn't scared of what might happen between them. Dojin gave her a mischievous smile, and said she was incredibly beautiful. A little later, while the girl slept peacefully in his arms, Dojin realized he had actually been waiting for that moment for a long time and that he had finally understood his true feelings for Yuju. For some reason, he remembered an incident at school, when a girl was hiding in a corner crying her eyes out. He had an idea of why she was upset, so he followed her and stayed nearby, ready to protect and support her if needed. Back then, he thought she was just a silly kid. Yuju returned home after calming down, and happily shouted that she was back. Taeju suddenly asked where Dojin was, but the girl was surprised and replied by asking why she should know where his friend was. At that moment, a shopping bag fell on her head, and she let out a surprised cry. She turned around, annoyed, and asked what his problem was. The guy, irritated, said he was her oppa and she shouldn't talk to him like that. Then he handed her the bag. Turning around, he headed to the door and told Yuju to hurry up so they could go to the internet cafe. The girl looked at the bag, confused. When she opened it, she only saw candy and snacks inside, and was surprised. It turned out Dojin had just bought them for her. Taeju, noticing his sister examining the candy, asked his friend why he had brought them. Dojin replied, "Just because." Standing next to the elevator, the guy commented that he had heard Dojin's older brother had already set a wedding date, and that Yuju cried for days after finding out. Dojin knew Yuju had a crush on his older brother, and that the news of the engagement had hit her hard. It wasn't surprising, but for some reason, it bothered him. And even though he was just now understanding his feelings, he realized he had actually been in love with her for a long time. So, instead of continuing to hide how he felt or trying to comfort her with candy, he wanted to confess his love to her openly. It was already dark. The moon was shining high in the sky. Yuju opened her eyes suddenly, and for a few seconds she tried to understand where she was and what had happened. Then she jumped up, horrified to realize what she and Dojin had done. Clearly, they had both gone crazy. Then she noticed she was wearing his shirt. It was soft and smelled nice. The thought that Dojin had dressed her while she slept made her feel a little embarrassed. Peeking silently into the kitchen, she saw him standing by the stove. She didn't know how to act around him now. After what had happened between them, she wasn't sure how he would react. But the smell coming from the kitchen was so tempting. He cooked like a god, and she couldn't resist eating. Suddenly, Dojin turned around when he heard a noise behind him and smiled. "You're up." Yuju didn't know what to expect from him, and was surprised by how kind he was being. Then she froze when he came closer to her. In the next instant, his hand gently wrapped around her waist, pulled her in, and kissed her forehead. Yuju, overwhelmed and confused by what was happening, looked at him with wide eyes. Dojin looked so sweet and tender, and he said they could sit down to eat. She sat at the table while he served the plates, and she thought all of it felt weird and unfamiliar. He was acting like he was her boyfriend. When he sat across from her, she thanked him for dinner. The aroma was truly amazing. Yuju felt so uncomfortable she probably would have run away from the table if the food didn't smell so good. The guy kept smiling happily and told her she shouldn't drink outside again. Hearing that, the girl asked why she should promise him something like that. She couldn't stop thinking about how he kissed her forehead, and the way he was treating her now. It was so unusual. She decided to clarify the situation and asked, "Was what happened between us just a one-time thing?" Dojin wasn't embarrassed at all. He smiled to the side and asked, "What are you talking about? After everything that's happened between us, of course we're going to start dating." Yuju froze with the spoon in her hand, unable to immediately process what he had just said. She couldn't imagine a sentence that linked the words him and her with dating. She asked him, "Wouldn't it be weird if we started dating? For the last 10 years, I've treated you like an older brother. And what would my brother say?" He didn't look confused or uncomfortable. He simply said, "There's nothing criminal about it. We're not even family. So, why couldn't we date? As for your brother, we'll just tell him directly." Yuji looked at him, realizing he was right. What she liked most about the idea was that if they started dating, she'd have that broad, beautiful chest all to herself. But then she dropped her head into her hands, remembering the one reason she wouldn't want to date Dojin. Because he was a possessive lunatic. Once she, her brother, and Dojin were drinking at a restaurant, and he admitted he'd be willing to do anything for his girlfriend. Taeja asked him what he'd do if, after all his sacrifices, the girl cheated on him. Dojin, a bit nervous, said he'd tried to make sure that never happened. When asked how, he said he'd cut off all her communication with other men. Taeju and Yiju exchanged glances and silently agreed that this guy was a total psychopath. Taeju asked, "And are you also going to stop talking to all the women around you?" Without hesitation, his friend answered, "Of course, I'll block them all." No discussion. Yuji nervously drank while listening to her brother argue with his friend. Her brother insisted Dojin couldn't isolate his girlfriend from the entire world, since she'd still have to go to work. But Dojin replied that wasn't necessary. Hearing that, Taeju exclaimed, "You're not thinking of locking the poor girl up in the apartment, are you?" Meanwhile, Yuji remembered how she used to wonder why such a handsome guy didn't have a girlfriend. But now she understood. Despite his charm and gentle nature, he was just a possessive guy. She always thought he'd never get a girlfriend, and now she was horrified to realize she had become that girlfriend. Dojin cheerfully smiled and asked what she was thinking about so deeply. "You should eat before the food gets cold," he said. Yuju also thought there was no way he had asked her out because of feelings. Most likely, he just felt responsible for what had happened between them. So she asked if it wouldn't be weird to start dating just because of that. Since they didn't have strong feelings for each other, it seemed more logical to go on a few dates first, and then decide. She imagined that if Dojin spent a bit more time with her, he'd realize they weren't compatible at all. Dojin's expression became unreadable, and in a flat tone, he asked if she really thought relationships were a game. Was she mocking him? Then, he gently took her hand and interlaced his fingers with hers, holding it firmly. Yuji felt a shiver run through her body. His touch was so delicate, she looked at him, surprised. Dojin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. He said it was she who had made the first move, so she should take responsibility for what happened. Later, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at the marks on her arms, Yuju thought Dojin wasn't a dog, but her body looked like it had been bitten by a rabid one. She was covered in marks and didn't know what to wear to keep anyone from noticing. She spoke to herself in the mirror, thinking about how Dojin had even demanded she take responsibility. Is this how relationships work? She wondered. A little earlier, when she let go of his hand, she said that if he insisted so much, then she'd take responsibility. The guy looked delighted and happy and said that was exactly what he wanted. Embarrassed, the girl kept eating and thought he was really weird. But suddenly, she felt something and flinched. Her cheeks turned even redder, and she asked what he was doing. Didn't he realize that was her leg? Meanwhile, under the table, Dojin was slowly caressing her leg with his. Smiling, he pulled down the neckline of his shirt a little, revealing his collarbones, and told her that, since she had agreed to take responsibility, he was curious to know if she wanted to explore that chest she seemed so interested in. Seeing that, the girl even dropped her spoon, overwhelmed by anticipation. Then she realized she had fallen because of her own weakness. If she weren't so obsessed with that damn sculpted chest, she wouldn't have given in so easily. So she said she needed to go to the bathroom. Suddenly, she felt a hand around her waist. He was behind her, holding her, and asked why she had taken so long. Then he brushed her neck with his lips from behind, and an electric shock ran through her body. Yuji was enjoying it. But everything was so new and awkward for her that she called him a pervert and told him to stop acting like that. Dojin was surprised and asked why she called him that. Leaning on the sink, The girl scoffed and asked him to look at all the marks on her body. The boy scoffed too and said he couldn't believe she was saying that. He lifted his shirt to show the marks on his own body, and said that between the two of them, she was the pervert. Just look at her handiwork. Yuju pulled his shirt back down, and reminded him they both had class that day, so she suggested they go to college together, and asked him to stop seducing her. Dojun replied that he knew that if he kept seducing her with his broad chest, she would end up falling madly in love with him, and without letting her say anything, he kissed her. The girl thought, desperate, that thanks to him, she definitely wouldn't get enough sleep and would be late to class. But the next morning, Yuju managed to arrive at college on time. She sat in the classroom, although her thoughts were far from the lecture. She wondered if Dojun could focus in his. Yesterday, he had been so obsessed with her, but today, surprisingly, he was behaving calmly. Worried, she texted him. The guy replied that his class would end at 5:10 p.m., and she said she'd be free at that time too. Then he suggested they have dinner together, and asked her not to leave without him. Yuju smiled at the screen and thought the emoji he used looked just like him. She was acting like a love-struck fool. A silly smile spread across her face, and she wondered if Dojun had always been this sweet. Yuju's class ended a bit earlier than expected, but she planned to wait for Dojun, just as they had agreed. As she passed by two girls, she accidentally overheard them talking about how cherry-flavored lip balm made kissing even more enjoyable. Apparently, there was even a popular challenge now, wearing different flavored lip balms and making the boyfriend guess which one it was. Yuju stopped, thinking it was interesting, but didn't want the girls to notice she was listening. She started rummaging through her bag, thinking it was a perfect excuse to kiss her boyfriend again. She finally found her lip balm. Hers was strawberry. She applied it to her lips, convincing herself it meant nothing, that she just had dry lips. Then she decided to hurry. She wanted to go to Dojun's classroom to surprise him, but she didn't notice the guy coming from the opposite direction. It was Sungmin. When he saw her, he recognized her immediately, and called her name. But Yuju didn't stop, so he grabbed her hand to get her attention. He smiled and asked where she was going in such a hurry. The girl pulled away from him immediately, as if he had touched fire, which surprised the guy. She asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. Sungmin raised his hands and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare her, that he was just happy to see her. Yuju looked at him suspiciously. His overly friendly attitude made her nervous, since they weren't even close. So she asked why he had called her. The guy said he just wanted to know how she had gotten home, that he didn't have her number and couldn't call to make sure. Then he asked if she'd give him her number. Yuju didn't like that at all. She didn't want to misunderstand, but she felt like he was flirting. She had no intention of playing along, so she told him she was in a hurry and that she had a boyfriend. Sungmin looked very surprised, but he didn't give up and said he had heard she was single, to which the girl replied that that had changed. Suddenly, Dojun appeared behind her and called her by name. The girl smiled at him immediately, as if clinging to a lifeline. Sungmin gave him a look full of disdain. He didn't like that guy getting into his business for the second time. Meanwhile, Dojun radiated a dangerous aura. It was obvious he wasn't happy to see that guy near his girl again, but he tried to calmly and gently ask what Yuju was doing there. Yuju ran toward her boyfriend so fast that Sungmin didn't have time to react. He wanted to stop her and talk a bit more. The girl walked up to Dojun and, smiling, said it was already time to go. He looked at her, puzzled, clearly realizing something had just happened, but said nothing. He simply exchanged a warning glance with Sungmin. He didn't like that guy being near Yuju again. For his part, Sungmin wasn't happy to see him either. Then Dojun smiled softly and deliberately, wrapped his arm around the girl, saying yes, it was indeed time to leave. The couple turned around and walked away hugging each other, leaving Sungmin stunned as he watched them go. He adjusted the brim of his cap and thought, what the hell is going on here? She had said before that Dojun was like family, but now everything felt very different. Yuju buckled her seatbelt and heard Dojun say, with a touch of jealousy, that she seemed to be very popular with the guys. The girl was surprised and replied that that wasn't true at all. Dojun looked at her and told her it was, that she was very attractive and that lots of guys noticed her. Yuju thought with a bit of bitterness, I finally run into a wall, his possessiveness. But even now, it was hard for her to admit it. She also thought none of this would be happening if it weren't for Sungmin. She was worried that Dojun would go into possessive mode, but suddenly felt his fingers intertwining with hers in a silent gesture. The girl blushed and asked, "Are you jealous of me?" Then he, also a bit red-faced, confessed, "Yeah, I'm insanely jealous of you." It took Yuju a few seconds to process what she had just heard, and to her surprise, she felt something warm and pleasant from his confession. Then she laughed happily and said it was strange. She had never seen her brother like this. Dojin, somewhat indignant, asked, "What's strange about it? Isn't it natural for me to get jealous if another guy flirts with my girlfriend?" But Yuju explained that to her it was weird, because they hadn't even officially started dating and he was already jealous. That despite all the years of friendship, that had never happened before, right? Then Dojin gave her a cheeky smile and said that actually, he'd been feeling jealous of other guys over her for a long time. The girl was in shock from his confession. Her heart was pounding. She looked at him wide-eyed and asked, "What do you mean? Are you saying you've liked me for a long time?" The guy blushed and looked down as he replied, "Yeah, for a long time. I didn't want to admit it, but that's how it was." Yuju couldn't believe he had just confessed his love to her. She felt joy and excitement. She quickly started asking him when he'd realized it, saying she had no idea about his feelings. She thought he had only asked her out of guilt, because of what had happened between them. Dojin, a bit embarrassed, admitted that he had liked her since high school, but he never wanted to acknowledge it. He had even gotten mad at his brother because of her, just because she liked him better. The girl, shocked, covered her mouth with her hand. She could barely believe what was happening. For some reason, she had never really thought about her own feelings for Dojin, but now she realized that she liked him too. He went on saying it wasn't about responsibility. If it were, he would never have gotten involved with his friend's younger sister. Getting closer, he said that from the beginning, he had his own reasons for getting close to her. Then he kissed her softly, and she felt a warmth grow in her chest. She couldn't believe this was happening. He had never shown his true feelings, until now. And who would have thought he'd be tormented for 2 weeks just because she touched his chest? So she stepped back and asked, "You expect me to just believe you like that? Because up until recently, you had me making your coffee, waking you up in the morning, and doing you favors." Dojin admitted that until then, he had thought she was just drunk and randomly touched people. He was surprised to learn she felt specifically attracted to him. Then he took her hand and told her she could now touch his chest, that very chest that drove her crazy. As her hand rested on it, suddenly she asked, "Have you heard of the lip balm challenge?" Later they went to the movies, and she felt strange. That meant they were really on a date. Dojin told her he had bought her favorite combo, half salted popcorn, half caramel, and a Coke, and asked if he got it right. Yuju thanked him. He said he'd gotten tickets for the earliest screening so they wouldn't miss their dinner reservation. She replied that she was perfectly happy. She took a sip of her Coke and looked at Dojin's hands, thinking that, since it was a date, they should be holding hands. Suddenly she heard his voice and feared he might be reading her mind. But unexpectedly, Dojin covered his chest with his hands and, embarrassed, asked her not to touch him in public. The girl was surprised and asked him what he thought she was. Then she yelled that he was acting like a fool and stepped toward him, but stopped and said she took it back, that she was the fool. Dojin smiled and asked her what was wrong, that she looked so cute she was making his heart race. The girl got annoyed again and told him to hurry up. Soon they were already sitting in the movie theater. Yuju sighed and ate popcorn. The romantic movie was so boring she yawned the whole time and thought they should have picked a thriller instead. To her surprise, Dojin was fully focused on the movie. She sighed and decided, at the very least, to enjoy her favorite popcorn. She reached her hand into the bucket but missed and hit something hard. Dojin smiled at her and asked, "What are you doing?" Yuju was shocked, wondering if he had lost his mind. She had barely touched him. In the next moment, he took her hand and said that if she wanted, they could leave before the movie ended and spend some time together outside. And that's how this emotionally charged episode ends. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episodes.